Hi everyone, welcome to week 4 of your Law and Ethics for Pharmacy Technicians course. This week we are covering chapter 4, which is on federal regulations of drug products. Now, probably the first thing that you're going to notice about this particular chapter is, oh my goodness, there are tons of laws that you need to learn. And there are quite a few laws that are highlighted in this chapter. And I'm going to kind of just point out some of the highlights of some of the more important ones in this presentation. But do make sure that you go through and read about all of them. They're all obviously very important. But the ones that I'm going to highlight are typically the ones that you are responsible for on your PTCB exam. You'll see them, most frequently asked and things like that. So that's why I choose the ones that I choose when I do highlight them. So you may or may not be aware, but, if you've ever seen any old Westerns or anything like that, back in the early days of medicine, you would have somebody who would basically sell you a tonic and it would cure everything. It would be anything from lumbago to chicken pox to headaches to whatever. And it would have all these claims on the label, or the person hawking it would have all these claims. And ultimately, a lot of those were just alcohol with different types of flavorings and things like that. So in the early 1900s, that's when it was determined that we kind of needed a little bit of rules and regs when it came to medications. So that's where we start, is with the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. So what this did was, it did several different things, but it prohibited distribution or sale of misbranded and impure and improperly labeled food and drugs. So what that really means is you could not sell something if you knew that it didn't do what it was supposed to do. So this applied to drugs, food, liquors, medicine, all of those different types of things. So you couldn't just say this is going to cure whatever if it didn't. So that was the very first step in starting to get to the point where we are today. The next law is the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. And so this is where we started regulating opiates. So we added a tax for opiates and any of the products that's used to manufacture cocaine. And so the whole idea here is that anybody who was going to sell these things had to register with the IRS. So they had to know that you were selling them. And then in 1938, we took that original law and we made it better. So now we're going to have to do things like having an actual drug application with the FDA, making sure that what's in that particular drug has the purity, the strength, the proper packaging, all of those types of things. So this is where we got that power to say yes or no to different drugs that were coming out there. Some of the key things in this particular act were that you had to have labels that contained adequate directions to make sure that they were being used safely. It also required FDA approval before you could go out and market those types of drugs. The next one is another important one, and that's the Durham-Humphrey Amendment. And this is where we finally got that label of you cannot, federal law prohibits dispensing without a prescription, and that's where that came from. And that's actually been updated and changed since then, but that's where we kind of made that break between here's our what we call legend drugs or prescription drugs, and here is our over-the-counter drugs. So that's what this particular law did. Very important law. And if you know anyone who is a child from the 1960s, in the early part of the 1960s, there was a drug called the thalidomide drug, and this particular drug was given to patients to pregnant women to help prevent morning sickness. It was what we call an off-label use, and it was given, and we found out later that it caused birth defects. So because of that, we came up with this new amendment, the Kiefer-Harris Amendment of 1963. So this is where we have, again, more and more regulations around the medications. So you have to prove that that particular drug is effective. So you can't just go and start giving medications out. You have to have the companies have to prove what we call their efficacy to the FDA before you can actually go out and market to the people. So that's where this one came in. A couple other important ones that you'll want to make sure that you understand is the Comprehensive Drug Abuse and Prevention Control Act of 1970. This is where we started dividing controlled substances into different groups. So make sure that you pay special attention to the different groups of controlled substances and what that means. We also have the Poison Prevention Packaging Act. This is where you have to have packaging so that children cannot get into it. Of course, there is OSHA, which is all about preventing, workplace accidents and those types of things. The Drug Listing Act is where we started giving our drugs NDCs, National Drug Codes. And those are some of the big ones. The only other one that I really want to point out to you, they do talk to you a little bit about the Orphan Drug Act and things like that. But the most probably recent one that you may be aware of is the one, I'm just sliding through the slides trying to find it, other than HIPAA, obviously. The most current one that everyone's kind of on the top of everyone's mind is this one. And this is the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005. So this is where the things like having pseudoephedrine behind the counter, that's where all of these types of things come from, is from this. And then the last thing that you're going to look at in this chapter is some of the different regulatory agencies that are part of making sure that all of these laws and acts are followed. So as you're going through, like I said, there is so much material this week, but if you have questions or problems, please make sure that you reach out to me, and have a great week.